Welcome back to another episode of Miller's Movers, where each week we take a look at the weekend that's just been and also take a good look at the newly released handicap marks, which come out every Tuesday morning. The weekend review this week is fairly swift, really. My attention was largely focused on Cheltenham, and most of the horses that were of interest at Cheltenham will feature in Handicap Moves and Shakers. Perhaps the two that didn't, that are worthy of mention for different reasons, ran at Cheltenham on Friday. The first was Chianti Classico. He put up a really brave performance to finish third, given that we now know that the tendon slipped off his hock in the closing stages. And when you watch it back, you can quite clearly see where that happened. He's been a real favourite of everyone on the SBK podcast, and it's very sad that to think his racing career certainly is in some doubt. I think it'll be a big effort to get him back to him on a race course, but nevertheless, he's had a fine career, albeit a fairly short one, and I've got no doubt that Kim Bailey and Matt Nichols and all the team there will make sure he gets the very best of care and the very best potential outcome for the future, whether that's back on the race course or in a nice retirement home. The other horse that featured on Friday and won't feature in Handicap Moves and Shakers because we don't know what the handicap will do with him yet is Stumptown, who was a really cosy winner of the cross-country chase under Keith Donoghue, who's a bit of a master of these Banks races. There was a great photo that I'm sure many of you have seen of a pretty big grin across Keith's face as he landed after the last. He knew he was going to win, and I think he also knew he'd got the job done well. He was going to win cosy, and the handicap was going to have a real job to grab hold of this horse and give him enough for a rise to potentially dent his chances. So I think he's going to have a leading chance come March for the cross-country race, which, to reiterate, is a handicap this year changed. I think it's a really good change. He was an impressive winner, and I think it'll take a very good horse and a very well handicapped horse to beat Stumptown come March. Then on the Saturday at Cheltenham, as I said, most of this racing will feature in Handicap Moves and Shakers, but the feature race, which I think we can cover now, was the December Gold Cup, won by Charlie Deutsch and Venetia Williams. As they seem to do each weekend, they seem to pick up a feature race. Jean-Rond, I wasn't sure that this track would suit him, but it certainly did. He worked pretty hard to get to the front and then dictated things from there with Madara and went pretty hard enough early on. Charlie Deutsch said he was able to get his breathers in when he wanted, but he did say that Jean-Rond was not the sort of horse you can dictate to too much. You have to let him do his own thing, and he was comfortably able to repel Madara up the home straight, who I tipped up as an anti-post bet at 9-1. I was pretty confident throughout the race. I thought he travelled well, and I did think he would come and pick Jean-Rond up the hill. But this was the furthest he'd gone. It is on the new course, so it is a bit of a stamina test. A few people have sort of questioned his resoluteness in the closing stages. He did lift his head a little bit. My initial thought was that maybe they'd regret not putting the tongue tie on. With his best form for Sophie Leach, he had cheek pieces which were refitted this time and a tongue tie which he was without on Saturday. But it's since transpired that actually he returned with a small injury. So maybe that is to blame. He's gone up £5 for finishing second. That's a little bit of a harsh rise, but I do think some of that is perhaps factored in from the fact that he didn't have any adjustment to his mark after his very good run in the Paddy Power Gold Cup. I wouldn't be as quick as some perhaps to give up on him. I would be prepared to give him another chance, particularly under a slightly more patient ride. I wonder in hindsight whether Harry Scouter might have preferred to have just sat off Jean-Rond a little bit, had one good run at him up the hill, having conserved a bit of fuel around that race. And I wouldn't be at all surprised to see the tongue tie fitted next time, which might well be known the Skeltons back in the play in March at the festival. Wouldn't be at all surprised if they leave him alone between now. They're well able to get one fit without a prep run. So Madara, I'm not fully giving up on him yet, just off the £5 higher mark of 145. Jean-Rond, he's gone up £8 to a mark of 144. Now, I think that might stop him, actually. He was an impressive winner, but I do think this was a below average renewal of this race. And whilst he had to go quite hard early on to get his position, it was a fairly small field. And I just wonder whether in races of this nature, these 2 mile 4 handicap chases, whether he'll get such an easy time of it and get left alone in front as he was here. And I think given Charlie Deutsch's interview afterwards, which he is a slightly quirky horse and you have to do things his way, I think he'd be a horse that I'd oppose off £8 in future. But this is the great game. It's a game of opinions. Carl Hinch, who owns Fugitive, who finished third, was having a chat with him after the race, and he didn't think anything would touch Jean-Rond. And when I spoke to him this morning, he thought an £8 rise wouldn't stop him at all. So one of us might be right, but Gemerond a la Pose. As a fugitive, he ran another good race. Connection just felt afterwards that the ground was perhaps just on the lively side for him, and he's bet it in a race where the front two come back to him. They didn't. They finished very strongly, and he was never quite able to get to them. But he ran a really good race. He's down £1 now to a mark of 149. He's undoubtedly well handicapped, particularly when the rain comes and the soft ground. But you would just have to caveat that with the fact that his form does tend to tail off from the new year onwards. I'm sure Richard Hobson, his trainer in the team, Shirley Becker and co will be trying very hard to change up his routine, keep him fresh going into the spring. But that would just be at the back of your mind if you're fancying fugitive for future assignments. The final race I want to pick up on in the weekend review was the return of Masborough, who made a really impressive chase debut at Fairyhouse on Saturday. This team have told us all along that he was a chaser in the making, and you can see why. He travelled powerfully through that race. He was neat and organised when in tight to the fences and showed plenty of scope when he was long. But what I particularly liked was as he landed from the back of the last and he had Tully Hill and Asian Master fairly close up behind him, although they were working hard. Mark Walsh only had to give him a squeeze and a little flick of the stick, and he really quickened up very smartly away to the line. All of Willie Mullins' horses are stepping forward for a run, so there's plenty more to come from this horse. And I was very tempted by the roundabout 9-2 price with SBK for the Arkle. Ballyburn is still a fairly short price favourite, around about 7-4. I was lukewarm on his chase debut. He's clearly got a big engine. I didn't think he jumped like a 2-mile chaser. Masborough definitely does jump like a 2-mile chaser. And my concern with Masborough this year at the start of the season was whether he would be like most Triumph Hurdle winners and need a trip in time. And I just couldn't see that Willie Mullins would send what would be a 5-year-old towards the Browns advisory over 3 miles. That can be a very gruelling race. And I wondered whether he'd have the speed to cope with this Arkle trip. But he certainly has got the speed. He's got more than enough speed. I would favour him over Ballyburn. And the only thing that stopped me putting him up as an anti-post bet is the fact that I still cling to the hope that Nicky Henderson might yet send Sir Gino over fences, and I do think he's a very exciting horse indeed in the novice rank. So we'll perhaps take a watching brief. I think if Sir Gino runs in the Christmas hurdle or runs over hurdles at Christmas, he's certainly going to stay over hurdles this year, in which case it might be that I revisit this price about Masborough in the not too distant future. So into handicap moves and shakers now, and there's quite a few to get through this week, so I will try and keep it fairly brief. And the first one to talk about is Djelo. We have to go back all the way to last Sunday for that. He won the Peterborough Chase at Huntingdon in really impressive style. I was pleased to see him do it. This is a horse I've got plenty of time for. He's a horse I want to follow this season. He's been given an £11 rise now to a mark of 160. That's largely academic in terms of whether he's well handicapped or not. He's into graded races now, but it's just good to get a view of what the handicapper makes of him. Very rare the handicapper gets them too far wrong. Mark of 160 does suggest he's getting towards being able to compete in these grade ones now. To put it into context, Protectorat went into last year's Ryanair rated 165, and the handicapper suggests he ran to a mark of 167 to win that. Now that was perhaps a slightly below par Ryanair on average, but Djelo is certainly going the right way. He's still a young horse. He's a French import to the Venetia Williams yard. A couple of seasons ago, year after year, these horses tend to find plenty of improvement here from one year to the next. I don't think he's finished improving yet. Soft ground probably does see him at his best, and maybe a flatter track might suit him well. Perhaps Cheltenham might take a bit more operating round, but he ran well enough in the Turners last year. I think it's an exciting horse, and he's certainly one I'm going to follow, potentially over a cliff this year. The second horse I want to mention is Kado De Joie for Nicky Henderson. He's got a £6 rise up to a mark of 119 after winning very, very comfortably at Lingfield under James Bowen, who gave him an ice cool ride. Sat off the pace. Fine Casting, who was fairly well backed himself with Ben Pauling, who was racing off a £2 lower mark over hurdles, and he's rated over fences. Got an equally nice run of it up front. And I did think that James Bowen might have got his fractions wrong, but he got there, jumping the last, only had to be squeezed out to win going away. This horse is winning plenty now, and I think he'll certainly step up from this. This was 2 mile 4. The way he went through the race suggests that further than this, even 3 miles wouldn't be a problem, and soft ground equally is no issue. So Kado De Joie up £6, a mark of 119 for Nicky Henderson and the Noel Feely Racing Syndicate. I think this is a horse that should go into your tracker, and you definitely want to follow him wherever he turns up next. Another Nicky Henderson horse I want to mention is Jingko Blue. He made a really impressive chase debut at Uttoxeter. He's gone up £7 now to a mark of 147, but that Uttoxeter race was deep enough. He was conceding race fitness and chase experience to the runner-up Hashtag Boom and the third place Jaguar, who'd been a really impressive horse in his two previous chase runs. And Jingko Blue was fairly keen for the early stages. He'd have had every excuse not to have quite finished off his race, but he was very powerful at the closing stages over 2 mile, 4 furlongs. This mark of 147, I don't think that will stop him. His hurdle form stacked up very well. He beat Robbie Llewellyn's Titan Discovery at Ascot, giving that horse £13. Beat him 6 lengths. It could have been 16 lengths. Titan Discovery's rated 124. I think Jingko Blue is a really exciting horse, but it'll just be a case of what they do with him now. With the loss of the Turners, there is no level weights novice contest over this trip at the Cheltenham Festival, so Connections have to decide whether they are going to step him up in trip to 3 miles, and I think there's certainly every chance he'll stay that trip, or whether they're going to try and play a little bit clever now and look after this mark of 147, which would make him a live contender for the new or the reinstated novices handicap chase over this trip at Cheltenham. But regardless, Jingko Blue, wherever he goes next, certainly a horse of immense potential and one I'm keen to keep on side. Going up £8 is Sayva for John Joe and AJ O'Neill. And £8 is a fair old whack, but actually you could consider that to be a fairly lenient rise, up now to a mark of 122. But he beat the 133 rated Pigeon House at Hereford, beat him 2 lengths. He was getting £5, but this mark of 122 still looks more than workable. Particularly liked at Hereford, he was very good in the finish. He ran very straight. He put his head in a great position, showed a great attitude, and battled all the way to the line. Should stay further as well, likes soft ground. It'll just be a case of what the O'Neill team do now. He's clearly a talented horse. Do they continue in handicaps, or do they perhaps try and test him in a higher grade and see whether he might be up to graded contests against other novices? But Sayva, a mark of 122, despite the £8 rise, still looks more than workable. Another one we just want to mention very quickly is Mr. Hope Street. Now, he was mentioned in last week's episode. He got an £11 rise on that occasion. Under a clever piece of placement, he ran again and won again at Warwick under a £7 penalty this week. So he was £4 well in, but he was dropping back to 2 mile 4, briefly turning in against a well-handicapped horse called Don't Tell Sue of Paul Nicholls. Just looked like he might be caught a bit tat for toe, but he very quickly got to grasp with that rival, cleared away in decent style. He's up now to a mark of 124, so another £4 rise, but he's clearly a horse going places. I think when they step him back up to 3 miles again, perhaps after a bit of a break, because he's had a few races quite quickly now, Mr. Hope Street is certainly a horse I'll be following wherever he goes next. Like his stablemate, and in the same ownership actually, Jango Baie, like Jingko Blue, had to concede race fitness and chase experience to Springwell Bay and Caldwell Potter at Cheltenham over 2 mile 4. But this horse, although not overly big, jumped like an absolute buck. He was really neat over his fences. Clearly is going to make up into a better chaser than he was hurdler. And the handicap has just bumped him up £3 now to a mark of 149. I think he'll stay further, so it might well be that he's considered a candidate for the Browns Advisory Chase at the Cheltenham Festival, but all for off a mark of 149. That novice handicap chase would certainly be tempting. Given he jumps so well and he's got experience of Cheltenham already, it might be that the Henderson team decide not to run him all that much between now and Cheltenham, try and protect this mark of 149. If they do that, I think Jango Baie at the moment be top of my shortlist for the novices handicap chase. But of course, there's a lot of water to pass under the bridge between now and March. But Jango Baie really impressed with his jumping at Cheltenham, and is certainly a horse in novice chases that you want to be following. A horse that didn't win and has got a rise, which is something I normally look to oppose, is Wreckless Eric. He's up £3 now to a mark of 128, but I actually want to keep him on side. He ran in the 2 mile 1 furlong handicap hurdle, which was won by Mirabad, who largely took the race apart at halfway. Mirabad is a free-going horse, slightly carted his jockey Luke Scott, who decided not to fight him, and they opened up a very big advantage through the middle part of the race, and then set good for actions, got their breathers in at the top of the hill when they needed it, and were able to come home unchallenged. Wreckless Eric under Keelan Woods was settled towards the rear of the field, and things just didn't happen for him. When you're in that situation, whilst you might want to be trying to go and close down that runaway leader, you are depending on those in front of you also holding that same sentiment. You know, you can't come out and go wide and pass everyone and try and chase the leader down by yourself. So I think Keelan probably had to sit and suffer. Wreckless Eric finished a really good effect up the hill. He's certainly now starting to relax better. He was a bit wayward as a juvenile last year, but he's relaxing well now. And I think on this evidence, he'll stay further than this 2 mile, 1 furlong. But even if he was back at this trip, I don't think £3 would necessarily stop him. A mark of 128 still looks workable. And I think you can put a line through that run and say that things just didn't really pan out for him. Also in that race and making a return after 600 plus days off was Bo Zenith, having a first start for Nicky Hansen, having switched from the yard of Gary Moore. His last start with Gary Moore was in the Grade 1 Juvenile at the Aintree Festival, where he went down by just a short head to Zenta. She's now rated 143. 5 lengths further back in third was Nusray. He's rated 137. And Bo Zenith looked like he was going to get tailed off on his return at Cheltenham in that 2 mile, 1 furlong handicap hurdle. Top of the hill, he was really going nowhere, but he found plenty up the hill for pressure under James Bowen. Eventually flew home to finish third. He's up £3 now to a mark of 138. He is going to have to prove that he can stick his training. He's been off a long time, so it'll be interesting to see how he comes out this race. And of course, you always have to be slightly wary of the bounce factor with horses that have run well on their next start. But Bo Zenith, I think, clearly looks well handicapped off a mark of 138, and he should have no trouble whatsoever staying further than 2 mile 1. So I think Nicky Henson's inherited a well-handicapped horse here. He's clearly nursed him back to health, and I think there's definitely races to be won over hurdles and then potentially fences next year with Bo Zenith. It's always slightly frustrating when you nap in a race that doesn't come through and the horse that wins that said race is one that's featured in Handicap Moves and Shakers. That happened with me on Saturday with Haiti Couleurs beating Peaky Boy. Haiti Couleurs has featured in this series already. I think he's a very smart horse, but I just thought Peaky Boy might have a bit more improvement. I was proven to be wrong. Haiti Couleurs under Sean Bowen jumped for fun, really slick with his jumping through that 3 mile, 1 furlong handicap chase at Cheltenham. Stayed very powerfully up the hill and duly got the job done. He's up £5 now to a mark of 135. In the heat of the moment, perhaps after the race, trainer Rebecca Curtis suggested they might well look towards the Brown advisory. I think that's a bit fanciful. He's got a mark of 135. He's going to have to improve about a stone to look like being able to challenge in that sort of grade. But I'm sure when cooler heads prevail in the weeks to follow, they might well consider that they've still got a very well handicapped horse, a horse that clearly acts around Cheltenham, stays very well, and as such, maybe the Ultima or even the Kim Muir might prove more reasonable for him. So Haiti Couleurs, mark of 135. He clearly acted around Cheltenham very well, so I'll be keen to keep him on side in the future. I've learned my lesson with him. Finishing runner-up in that race, and also another horse that got a good mention in Miller's Movers and Handicap Moves and Shakers earlier in the season, is Transmission for Neil Mulholland. He's gone up £1 to a mark of 133. He just got a little bit outpaced at the top of the hill, but again, he finished very strongly under James Bowen and was getting closer near the line. He previously won in an amateur's race under Patrick Mullins and showed that he acted on the new course here. I think that they might well look towards the Kim Muir for him. Neil Mulholland, year upon year, is able to find talented weight-claiming amateurs from Ireland. So I think Transmission might well be one for the Kim Muir. Mark of 133 doesn't look beyond him. And in a slightly stronger run race, which the amateur races tend to be, and certainly festival races tend to be, I think that would help him and a little bit further as well. Mark of 133 will suit this strong stayer who's translated his very good hurdle form over fences this season. The nap selection for the SBK betting podcast was the aforementioned Peaky Boy. And I was slightly disappointed with his effort in that 3 mile, 1 furlong handicap chase, but on watching it back, he didn't enjoy the smoothest passages through. He never lacked racing room, but he did get bumped around a little bit. I'm not sure he had the happiest time, certainly on the first circuit, but he still got there with every chance coming down the hill, and I was hoping he'd find plenty of pressure, and perhaps just didn't, but he's gone up £1 to a mark of 140. I just wonder whether on the Ultima, which is on the old course, this was on the new course, slightly sharper track, a little bit less of a stamina test, maybe under a slightly more patient ride. I still hold this horse in plenty of regard. I'm not keen to give up on him just yet. It's always frustrating to get bumped up £1 when you've only finished third. But I do think this was a decent handicap chase, won by Haiti Couleurs, Transmission in second. They're two very good horses that were clearly well handicapped. And Peaky Boy is fairly light on experience. This was only his second chase start. He only had 2 runs over hurdles, 1 run in a bumper. So he'd be progressing all the time for this. And I don't think Nico de Boinville gave him a really hard time once it became apparent that his winning chance has gone. So Peaky Boy, perhaps on less of a stamina test. Softer ground would suit. He has proven he's handled heavy ground. I'm not going to give up on him just yet. And I do still think he's got a very real chance of getting towards the Ultima with a decent chance. And then just one more horse to mention who's gone up in the handicap because he was an impressive winner at Cheltenham on Saturday is Liberty Hunter. Was given a really good ride by Harry Cobden for trainer Evan Williams. He's gone up £7 now to a mark of 151. I do think they're probably going to look towards graded contests for him, but I'm just not sold on him. He doesn't look like an ultra slick, fast jumping 2-miler to me, and I do think his performance here was slightly elevated by the fact that Deataried, off a positive ride, didn't get home on this stiff track, and his other market rival Master Chewy, although managed to stay on his feet this time, again didn't jump with any real fluency. I think that left Liberty Hunter with a very easy opportunity here. He was clearly a well-handicapped horse off a mark of 144 going into this, but I think off 151, either stepping into graded races or slightly deeper handicap chases, he'd be a horse that I'd be keen to oppose going forwards. Horses going down in the handicap now, and for the first one we've got to go back to Huntingdon on the Sunday before last, and the Jamie Snowden trained Milldam. He had his first start for 272 days, finished 4th in a handicap hurdle, beaten 14 lengths on ground that was described as soft, but it changed to soft from good to soft in the morning, so the rain was only just getting into the ground. This is a horse that is at his very best on heavy ground. The closer to unraceable it is, the better this horse is. He's down now to a mark of 125, dropped a pound. That's still above his last winning mark, but he looked progressive last year on heavy ground. It's an absolute prerequisite for him, and we're bound to get plenty of rain at some point, probably through the Christmas period. I think Milldam is a horse that should be kept on side when heavy is the genuine ground description. Gallic Geordie, trained by Sam Drinkwater, is a horse that's featured plenty amongst my selections on the SBK podcast over the years. He made his seasonal return at Lingfield earlier this week, was given a fairly quiet ride, I felt, by Ned Fox. He did get a little bit tired in the closing stages, but the key thing to note with this horse is that his best effort each season comes on his second start. He's won on his second start on each of the last 2 seasons, both times at Wetherby, and actually that would be on each time of the last 3 seasons, but he fell at the final fence at Lingfield when looking likely to land the spoils 3 years ago. He got dropped a fairly generous £2 for this return effort. He's down to a mark of 113 now, which is below his last winning mark, and I expect him to return to Wetherby, where he clearly acts well on soft ground. I think a mark of 113 is more than workable, and I'm sure Sam Drinkwater will find a winnable opportunity for him through the Christmas period when there's plenty of racing and the odd light race can be found and targeted. Damarta for Ollie Murphy and Sean Bowen was beaten a fairly long way on his second chase start at Warwick. He jumped quite slowly through the early stages. That was in a race where Harry Skelton went hard from the front. It was always going to be hard to get back into the race from there, but having looked like he was going to finish a long way behind, Damarta rallied really well off the home bend at Warwick, finished a really good effect over this trip of 2 miles. His very best piece of hurdle form came on soft ground over 2 miles, 4 furlongs. He got dropped a pound of this down to a mark of 112. I think this is a winnable mark. He's by no means a superstar, but Ollie Murphy continues to have his field team in really good form, and I think a race over fences is there to be won with this horse off a mark of just 112. Also running at Warwick and again getting beaten was You Wear It Well. She's been dropped £4 down to a mark of 137. She ran in the listed mares chase at Warwick, where Jerry Duran, the winner, got a very good ride from Harry Skelton, went to the front, dominated things. Conversely, You Wear It Well was settled and dropped in, and very early on it was going to prove pretty much impossible to get back to Sheridan unless she fell in a bit of a hole. She didn't. Harry Skelton judged his fractions to perfection. It wasn't a great ride by Gavin Sheehan. Perhaps the race didn't pan out as he expected, but I think the handicappers overreacted here, dropping this mare £4 down to a mark of 137. There is a very good mares programme, particularly over fences in the UK, so it's not a given that she will drop back into handicap company, but I do think a mark of 137 underestimates her value. She's a former Cheltenham Festival winner, and if the Snowdon team looked at this and thought the handicap mark was workable, I'd be very keen to follow her over 2 mile, 2 mile 4 over fences. She's yet to win over fences, but she jumps perfectly well. Things just haven't really panned out for her on either of her 2 starts. So You Wear It Well is certainly a mare that I'll keep on side if she were to drop back into handicap company. I think this weekend signalled perhaps the start of Dan Skelton starting to shuffle his pack ready for the Cheltenham Festival, and one that really caught the eye was Valgrand. He was beaten a long way in the 2 mile, 1 furlong handicap hurdle, but given that they were dropping back in trip, having tried 2 mile 4 where he perhaps didn't stay, you'd have expected this horse to be ridden prominently, and he wasn't. He settled in. That was in absolute contrast to when he won the Grade 2 at Cheltenham earlier this year, where he was given a very aggressive ride off the front. Here they elected to drop him in, and he never really got sighted. He's been dropped to £2 now, down to a mark of 137. The Scouts have got an excellent record in the county hurdle. They've won it 4 times in the last 10 years. They had Lodesud only just touched off by a length last year by that fast finishing effort from Absurd. Onto a mark of 137 now for Valgrand. That would have given him a lovely racing weight at 10 stone 9 last year. I would be very surprised if we see Valgrand again now before the Cheltenham Festival. I think this is his mark achieved for the county hurdle. Like I say, the Scouts love to target that race, and I think he looks like being their prime contender. And then to finish with, in horses coming down the handicap, is another Skelton horse who again was given, I thought, a fairly strange ride, is Etalon. He's been dropped £2 now, down to a mark of 135. Things haven't really happened for him over fences this year, but he's been quite highly tried. He made his return in the Halden Gold Cup. Here, when finishing behind Liberty Hunter, he was dropped in on ground that's probably livelier than he wants, but his very best form has come on soft ground when ridden prominently. It was clear from the outset here that this perhaps wasn't going to be his day. Potentially being lined up for the Grand Annual, the one thing I would caveat that with is that this horse is definitely better on a sound surface. He might also be better on a slightly flatter track. He has coped with Sandown, but there's not quite the undulations at Sandown that you get at Cheltenham. But regardless, he's now starting to get back down to a very appealing handicap mark of 135. And so Etalon is certainly a horse that should go into your tracker to see where he pops up next, even if it is at one of the big festival handicaps. And then 2 new entries to wrap things up this week. The first is The Secret Pearl for trainer Alex Hales, who's been given a fairly low mark of 102 off just 2 hurdle starts for Alex Hales. Finished 14 lengths at Lingfield behind Makina and Diva Luna. Diva Luna has been well regarded by Ben Pauling for some time, had really good bumper form. Things perhaps didn't pan out for her in this race behind Mekaina, but Mekaina finished runner-up on her first start behind a horse called It's Hard to Know. That horse is rated 124. The 14-length beating behind Mekaina suggests that The Secret Pearl is far better than a mark of 102. I think she might well go straight into handicaps. She only had 2 runs over hurdles, but she had plenty of experience in bumpers with 4 bumper runs and a point-to-point run. So it might be that Alex Halesyard see that she is experienced enough to go straight into handicaps after just 2 starts in hurdles. And if she does, a mark of 102, perhaps in a mare's handicap hurdle, should prove more than workable. Also getting a hurdle mark after just 2 starts is Koukeo for the O'Neill team. He finished runner-up on both hurdle starts, latterly at Warwick when a runner-up behind Fingal Hill. Fingal Hill is an Ollie Murphy-trained horse, had really good bumper form last year, looked impressive in this maiden hurdle. Fingal Hill's key form line, though, comes behind Epic West, finished second to him at Carlisle. Epic West has since gone on to win again under a penalty. This mark of 107, I think, looks more than workable for Koukeo, but he is fairly light in experience. He's only had a couple of bumper runs, one at the Punchestown Festival, and then these 2 hurdle runs. It might be that the O'Neill Yard decide to keep him to maiden and novice company for the time being, but if he were to be thrown into a handicap off a mark of 107, he would certainly be of interest. So that's it for the final episode of Miller's Movers in 2024. I hope you have a really good Christmas. Thanks for all your support throughout this year. I'll be back at the start of 2025 for a big roundup of all the festive action. In the meantime, be lucky with your betting, and I'll see you soon.